we can move to directly use the skills that we have developed as compliance professionals to manage risk, to manage business risk in the most dynamic business environment that, certainly you and I have ever lived through. And if you can identify, assess, and put a risk management strategy in place to manage risk, then you can do business literally at the speed of AI. And that's going to be, I think, if we, and I mean the collective we, and that includes you, if we can communicate that to our listeners and our audience, that now is the time to make that change. I think it will take compliance to a completely different level inside of an organization.
That was the voice of Tom Fox, #1 voice of compliance. I'm Sarah Cole, founder of Cole Forums, a high-trust network for CEOs, general counsel and senior leaders. I'm the host of Insights from the Coalface, and through my podcast, private dinners and curated events, I bring together extraordinary leaders for honest, no-filter conversations that go far beyond the boardroom. Each episode features global experts, from neuroscientists and journalists to CEOs and ethicists, sharing bold lessons and practical strategies. We explore the science of trust and motivation, the power of communication, the role of ethical leadership, and how to balance high-stakes careers with a fulfilling life. Cole Forums creates the framework. You and your peers make the magic happen. Tom Fox is the #1 voice of compliance, having founded the only podcast network in compliance, the award-winning Compliance Podcast Network. It currently has 60 podcasts, and Tom has won 28 awards for podcast hosting and producing. He's been honoured with awards for podcast series as diverse as Looking Back on 9/11, Understanding Lyme Disease, and Trial of the Century, the Enron Trial. He is also the co-founder of the Texas Hill Country Podcast Network. Tom is also an international best-selling author, having written 28 books on compliance, business ethics, and leadership. He is the author of the seminal work, The Compliance Handbook, 4th edition. He is most proud of his 3 best-selling children's books on compliance, Being a Compliance Officer is Awesome, Speaking Up is Awesome, and Compliance Saves the Galaxy. All 3 were published by Dinosaur House and available at Amazon.com. Tom Fox, the voice of compliance, thank you for joining me. How are you today?
I'm really happy to be here, and we are going to have the hottest day on record in my little part of the world today. So we're all looking forward to 104.
Well, we're not near the heady heights of 104, but let me tell you, where I live is the wettest place in Wales, and Wales is the wettest place in the UK, and we've had 2 weeks of sunshine in May, which never happens. So something crazy's going on. Bit like us in our podcast, I think. I'm so excited to get into this conversation. I think we're going to have a bit of fun today. And I want to start with asking you, how does a lawyer with a very successful career get into podcasting? And not just podcasting, but over 50 podcasts. You're nuts, you know that, right?
Absolutely. I believe the English word is mental.
That's true.
So the podcasting actually just was a natural evolution for marketing. When I had my own practice, I started blogging in 2010, and in 2012, the next logical step seemed to be podcasting. I did that in the legal area or legal arena I practiced in, which was international anti-corruption. And then in 2017, I got the bright idea that what we needed was a network to house all of the podcasts in the compliance space. And so I went around and we had 3 large trade organizations, we still do, and I went around to all of them and I said, "Look, let's form a joint venture. Let's create this podcast network. It will not take away from anything you're doing. It will supplement what you're doing. And not that I would ever suggest anything anti-competitive, but we'll corner all the market on advertising." And I could get 0 interest. So I just said, "Bleep it, I'll do it myself."
You wouldn't think, would you, something so cutting edge, you'd think people would be chomping at the bit to get involved. Well, it was a blessing, right? Because you've become a bit of a guru in the area. And I know how much work goes into one podcast, let me tell listeners. and how time consuming it is. And yet you still keep everything so engaging and fresh, and you're still doing your blog posts. I mean, this is a passion, isn't it? It's a way of life rather than some sort of vocation.
Absolutely. I've always been a voracious reader, and I enjoy writing as much as anything. And what I found was by interviewing literally the top experts in compliance, I could learn and consume information uh, that I could use in writing. So it's for me in many ways just a continuation of my intense curiosity on all things and a way to formalize it through the podcast process that led to monetization and a new career.
And what about the transition? Not that it's ever been a full transition, because I know you're still in practice, but to particularly compliance and ethics, what drew you to that area, do you think?
Sure. So in 2007, I became the general counsel of a company that at that time had the largest anti-corruption violation in the history of the world ever. And it was the United States law called the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act they violated. It was a Norwegian company headquartered in the United Kingdom with a U.S. subsidiary. And I was part of the new management team that was brought in after everything was resolved. And we had to build out a compliance program. At that point, I knew nothing about anti-corruption compliance. And so I did that. The company got sold, my job went away, and I decided what I really wanted to do with my life was race bicycles. So I went off with this grand adventure, cycling, racing in 40 and 20K events until one day on a training ride, I got taken out by a Hummer, and that ended my cycling career. So I convalesced for a couple of months, and fortunately, I was not seriously injured, but I was just banged up internally, and bruised organs and things like that, and it just took forever to heal. So when I finally got enough energy to get on my walker and toddle into my office at home, I knew I was gonna have to go back to work, and when you have one of those life-changing events, you changes your perspective a little bit, and I decided what I had really enjoyed in my last job was building the compliance program inside of a corporation. And this was 2010 now, and there were very few lawyers in private practice who did that. Lawyers who worked in the anti-corruption space either did investigations or negotiated with the government. And I wanted to be a solo practitioner, and so I knew I couldn't do investigations. I've never worked for the government or in the government, and I think you need that experience to sit across the table from the regulators. So I decided to focus on the nuts and bolts of building compliance programs inside corporations. So I became the nuts and bolts guy. And what I learned kind of from all of that is I always knew that when the universe closes a door, it opens another one. But what I hadn't fully appreciated is you have to have the courage to walk through that door. And I had that courage because I just said, I'm going to do what I want to do now. And that's how it all started.
I don't know if you realize, but we've got some synergy there, because I also changed direction after a major car accident. So I know what you mean. I wouldn't have said for me it was courage. I sort of decided to do something else so that I could recover, because it takes it out of you, right? Being a lawyer, and those roles are so very demanding. And interestingly, I thought it was going to be gentler in events, which turned out to be rubbish, by the way. Anyone who does events will know that. But I think sort of found my calling. And do you think it was like that for you? You sort of got into the groove of something that really was because you become the face of compliance for many people, right?
It certainly turned out that way, but it was just a variety of factors. So, for instance, I'm on my walker. I don't leave the house except to go to physical therapy. I can't meet people. I can't have a drink, go have dinner, go to a conference, go meet a client, any of that. And so I have to engage in social media, which in 2010 I knew literally nothing about. So, for instance, I told my daughter, I said, if you can get me set up on Facebook in 24 hours, I'll give you $100. Well, I learned a very valuable lesson because 20 minutes later, she came to me and said, okay, Dad, you owe me $100. Well, hire a subject matter expert. She was I don't know, 13 or 14 at the time, and she knew exactly what to do. But I became an early adopter of social media, and it may sound strange now, but it was actually Twitter that put me on the compliance map. Back then, Twitter was a very business-friendly platform, and a lot of businesses both advertised on Twitter, but also you could post things and get a lot of attention that way. So, probably not so much now, but it was all of those combinations of things, and then the other thing was there was nobody else talking about the nuts and bolts of compliance. I became the 3rd blogger in the compliance space, and I carved out a place as the nuts and bolts guy.
I think that's very modest. I mean, you've also written, well, last count, and I'm probably out of date, around 25 books on the subject as well. I mean, that that's pretty prolific writing there. What motivates you? What makes you get out of bed and go, today I'm embracing my 50 podcast series and my books and my blog and have the energy that I know you bring every day? What is it that does that?
I love what I'm doing, and, I get to talk to people like you all day long. I get to write books. I've had 2 books published this year, maybe more, now that I think about it.
Wow.
Maybe it's 4. I wrote 3 books in December, and then I wrote 1 in February. So, I publish books, and I feel like 2 things. One is, not to be too cliche, but I played football, American football in high school, and our coach taught us you have to earn it every day. And I feel like at my age today, I have to earn it every day. And that means suiting up and showing up. But it also means a lot of people who I interview for podcasts, this may be their first podcast, this may be their only podcast, and I owe it to them to be engaged, come every day, come ready, because they're gonna be ready, and so I owe it to them, and then I owe it to the compliance community. If I'm gonna call myself the compliance evangelist and the voice of compliance, that, I need to be out there leading, what I think is one of the conversations we should be having.
When you speak, it strikes me that you feel some responsibility around that as well, being the voice of compliance. Do you think that's fair? And if so, how does that show up?
Let's just say I had a long and checkered past where I didn't feel like that, so I have fully embraced that in my later years maturity.
It also strikes me listening to you that there's a huge amount of resilience and adaptability in that story. And I just wonder, I mean, for example, you've always touched on the fact that you embraced social media long before it was normality, which feels so alien now because it is in everyone's life. How do you think you embraced that? Because I understand the compliance side of things. You've been passionate about it and it emanates from you. But what about the actual tech side? And then, is there a bit of a nerd in you as well and you love all of that? Or has that just been a means to an end?
Complete, total, and utter geek.
I got you.
Yeah, when I used to, do recordings as a sound engineer, and I had this 50-pound huge reel-to-reel recorder that I would haul around and record, and then you would edit it literally, you'd have a little knife and you'd cut the tape and splice it, and you'd put splicing tape on. Then I moved to that with cassettes, so that I've always been fascinated by that, and with the tools that are available now, I mean, I'm a Mac guy, and Apple computers come preloaded with GarageBand, which is a software editing tool at no charge, and it's if I can figure out how to do it, anybody can figure out how to do it.
I beg to differ. I've had to defer that side of things to a professional. So again, I'm in awe. And in terms of obviously the remarkable achievement of such a successful podcast that endures as well, how do you approach selecting your guests? And we've already touched on the fact that some of them are very well versed in podcasts or performance, and then others maybe are new to it. And, you held everyone's hand, I know, through the process. But what makes you choose them?
It's not so much I choose them as they choose me. I'll interview anyone, and actually, last week, I had a foul up when I thought I was gonna have a recording, And, it's the first time I told the people, "I don't think you're a good fit for
Ah,
my
okay.
podcast," because they wanted to talk about the sale of cannabis, and I'm not interested in the sale of cannabis. I said, "Sorry, guys, just don't think corporate compliance audience is gonna resonate for you."
And how did that feel? Because if it was a first, that must have been kind of I can imagine being such a perfectionist is a bit of a disappointment, really.
I would say my pre-production process failed because they had not given me the information I needed to prepare a proper outline, so I didn't know what they wanted to talk about, and I opened our meeting, our virtual call with a, "Look, I'm really sorry, guys, but I don't even know who you work for." And they told me, and I went, "Hmm, yeah, this is not gonna work."
Yeah, because the research is tough, right? Because I even, and the person who, identified that I got this wrong about them will know who I'm talking about, but I actually thought somebody was really into martial arts, and it turned out it was the wrong it was the wrong person, because it's tough, right, doing the research. You obviously, you go to your usual suspects, but then maybe you have to dig a bit deeper with somebody who's less involved on social media, say, for example. What do you rely on in terms of resources? Are you yeah, I know you do your research, so how does it come about?
So I used to, do all the research myself in terms of I'd start with LinkedIn, use that as a starting point, look at the company they work for, go to the company's website, develop a series of questions based upon the product or services they were delivering. I evolved my pre-production process to ask them to give me certain information, all of that collected in one place so I didn't have to stumble around on LinkedIn and do 6 clicks to get to their company, and then also to tell me what they wanted to talk about and what they wanted to share in the podcast so I could more fully incorporate what they wanted to get out of the podcast into the actual recording.
And that's really interesting to me because obviously you identified your cannabis crew that wasn't going to resonate with your audience. But what stories have you found really resonate over the years?
Well, I would say 3. And I cannot tell you why with one exception. But the first one and the most well-listened podcast I have ever had was the following: Branding Lessons from Count Dracula, which is I did as a lark. In October, I always do a sort of a spooky Halloween theme throughout the month, and so I'm a big classic movie monster guy, and obviously Dracula is one of those. I did a blog and podcast on branding lessons from Count Dracula. It is to this day my number 1 podcast ever. Who knew? That was number 1. Number 2 was, I'm a huge Star Trek fan, and I met this guy who he and his partner were doing every episode of every TV show, movie, Star Trek, and I met him about 2011, 2012, somewhere in there, and he projected out that we're gonna go to 2026, and, there's been a lot of new Star Trek since then, so I'm sure it'll go longer, but I interviewed him. We did Star Trek up to the end of TNG over 2 episodes, and we both know every episode by heart, so it's complete, total and utter geek. And then the third one was, there was a woman in the little town I live near who, bakes cookies, and, she had this story. She was, I think, number 8 or 9 of in her family, a large Hispanic family, and she was so far down the line when she came along, the only thing they would let her do in the kitchen was bake cookies, so she became a cookie maker. She starts work after school, has a family, does all that. She's very close to her father. He becomes ill. She quits her job to become his primary caregiver. He eventually dies, and she is just in the depths of grief. Well, to help her get through her grief, she starts baking cookies. And I don't mean a cookie for Sarah and a cookie for Tom. I mean 10 dozen cookies for Sarah and 10 dozen cookies for Tom. And she starts giving these cookies away, and what they are iced sugar cookies, so a white sugar cookie with a design on it, ice and icing. and she gives them to her church. She's very, very, religious. She gives them to the church, she gives them to the Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, fire department, police, schools. Particularly at her church, they convince her, "You need to, open a business doing this," because we didn't have a bakery in our town. So she finally doesn't have the courage to do it, and she finally gets the courage to do it. She takes out a loan and does everything, and she signs all the documents March 1 of 2020. Well, 2 weeks later, they shut America down for COVID, and she's completely at her wit's end, and all of those people she'd been baking cookies for say, "We still need cookies, and you deliver." So she starts selling the cookies she was giving away. She makes so much money in the first 6 months of COVID, she completely pays for the renovation of her bakery. And later that year, when she can open, she opens it, and she's now the cookie lady of Kerrville, Texas. And I got more emails on that podcast. I got somebody from Sweden emailed me and said, "I wanna meet the cookie lady." And it's just, everybody's got a story, and you don't know what the story is till you visit with them.
And that I know I've heard you speak about this and you've written about the story and how important you think storytelling is generally, but also in compliance. I happen to really agree with you, but explain to the listeners who, they're a mix of leaders who are either CEOs or general counsel or chief ethics and compliance officers. Why do you think storytelling is so crucial?
So a couple of different reasons. One is I always knew that the audio format was, in my mind, the most powerful, even more powerful than televisions or movies. But I didn't understand the science behind it. Well, now they're actually talking about the science of audio, and that there's 4 quadrants of the brain, and one of those, which happens to be where dopamine is created, which is the kind of pleasure center of the brain, audio activates that. And I've heard over the years people are saying, "You're in my head. I can't get you out of my head." And it's because they listened to me and heard me, but something's going on up in your brain chemically that is burning that story or that communication into your brain so that you remember it. And so telling stories has been around forever for humans, and I'm just continuing that tradition.
Yeah, I mean, I remember as a child recording something for an exam and playing it while I was asleep on the basis that I'd read somewhere that the audio would trigger my memory. And it did work to some extent. So there's definitely colloquial stuff around that as well as the empirical data. And I think from my experience of running the podcast, it just seems to really strike a chord with people that visual stuff maybe doesn't always achieve because they're maybe doing something else, like going to the gym or what have you, while they're listening to it. Do you think that as a sort of media going forward then is just going to grow in popularity? I mean, you've seen it on a big trajectory, haven't you, since you started doing podcasting? And it does feel like every man and his dog is doing one now.
I think that it will supplement everything else, every other form of media. And so when I was young, I listened to the radio, and we used to have radio shows and storytelling on the radio, and that always was something that I enjoyed, and I just see that as a continuation of that. And you can do a podcast at the gym, you can do a podcast commute, on a trip, walking a dog, and various ways to consume that information, and I think it's gonna supplement all of the other forms of media that we currently have.
And so thinking about the impact that you have had since you started the podcast and then going forward into the future, do you think that I mean, I feel like I know the answer to this, but do you think you really had an impact on the conversation around ethics and compliance? Have you had any feedback from others that would reinforce that?
Of course, it has an impact on compliance. Uh, I'm the voice of compliance, and everybody knows who I am. I put it out there every day. I'm on the 6th edition of my compliance handbook. I'm now trying to lead the discussion of utilizing AI in compliance, and it's a responsibility and it's a gift at the same time, and I have to earn it every day.
And on the AI point, I was going to ask you about that because I feel like you've really been quite vocal about the role of AI in compliance. And I recently read a blog post where you were talking about how you envision technology transforming compliance programs. And I wondered if you might share with listeners your thoughts around that, just at a high level.
Sure. So we are at a true inflection point, at least in America, because the president has announced there will be no investigation or enforcement of corruption allegations. And so, what's the role of compliance if there's no law above you? Now, the law's still there. United Kingdom has their own bribery act, as a variety of other countries do. But I've tried to communicate to compliance professionals, now is the time to integrate your compliance program directly into your business operations so that you will move from a reactive detection mode to a predictive, prescriptive, proactive mode, and that you can actually drive greater business through making compliance predictive and proactive so that number one, you can respond to opportunities more quickly because you can identify the risks and manage those. And two, it will stop you from getting into trouble before you actually engage in a violation.
I think you've mentioned as well, not just the sort of risk side of things or even the proactive side of things, but I loved your point about education around compliance and how that's going to be changed by AI so that it's, I think you said it was more personalized and gamified, and effectively you were saying it's more dynamic. And that really struck a chord with me because I think that's something coming from an education background, having been with LRN, I really know we were hyper focused on, but we didn't have the functionality really to create it in a very personalized way. But that's possibly the trajectory we're seeing ahead of us, do you think?
Absolutely. And I hope I'm trying to suggest we move away from the term compliance training or even compliance communications to true education encompassing all of those so that if you're given snippets and reminders after you've received the basics that are applicable to your job or whatever the situation is. So if you're going to travel to a high risk country, get a snippet of here's what you need to watch for. If you think of AP clerk who is inputting information about payments, well, in SAP or other ERP programs, they'll have a check mark, "Is there a contract?" They can just remember to review, "Is there a contract?" They don't have to read the contract, they don't have to interpret it, but if there's no contract, no payment. That's something that basic. So, and with the what AI can do is can take all of the information about you and what do you need to do your job today? And that may be different tomorrow.
And with that in mind, and your own thoughts that I know you've shared prolifically on your blog, but I think it would be lovely for listeners to hear. You've seen the compliance landscape change so dramatically over the last decade. So it'd be remiss of me not to ask the compliance evangelist what the future holds from your perspective. What do you think, I don't know, say the next 5 years will bring?
I think we'll go one of two paths. If we do not embrace technology, if we do not embrace AI, we will become a back office function similar to internal audit, and I hope you're not an internal auditor. But just something that you have to do as a check the box exercise with little or no innovation because you'll receive little or no funding. Or we can move to directly use the skills that we have developed as compliance professionals to manage risk, to manage business risk in the most dynamic business environment that, certainly you and I have ever lived through. And if you can identify, assess, and put a risk management strategy in place to manage risk, then you can do business literally at the speed of AI. And that's going to be, I think, if we can, we, and I mean the collective we, and that includes you, if we can communicate that to our listeners and our audience that now is the time to make that change. I think it will take compliance to a completely different level inside of an organization, and we will be one of the top corporate functions because we can manage any risk, whether that's a crazy president with tariffs all over the place, whether it's a hurricane that's, never hit a place that's never had hurricanes, whether there's a weather event, whether it's a geopolitical event, whether it's a pandemic, whether it's, whatever it may be, we can manage any risk that comes along.
So developing that point a little bit, because I think it's so important. I agree with you. It's everything you just said, actually. How do you think businesses can sort of continue to overcome the challenge of making compliance like a business enabler? Because even now, after all this time, I think there's still this perception that there are either a regulatory checkbox, as you said, or even a business blocker.
So, one of the contributors to my recent book said he always started with the question, "What's the business value?" And so, what's the business value for this innovation and compliance? If the business value is simply, as you said, check the box and keep us out of trouble, we're never going to evolve. If the business value is, we will make the business run better, we will make it run more efficiently, we will have greater profitability because we can manage risk, whatever that risk might be, quicker than our competitors, then we will evolve going forward.
And if you could change one perception about compliance, if you could wave your magic wand, what would it be?
We are not Doctor No living in the land of no.
Kind of effectively making the same point then, do you think that basically the most successful compliance programs running now, I would say, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, are the ones where they're almost partnering with the CEO or the board in a more, as you said earlier, proactive way. It's a kind of a shift that I've seen over the last 20 years, really.
No, you're spot on, and I would add that so as you know, I'm a lawyer by professional background, so I look through life it's with the lens of a lawyer, and we have to get away from lawyer-based compliance. It's a multidisciplinary approach that's a business process, and if you're a lawyer and you can't make that shift, you need to have people around you who can do that shift for you. But I teach, university, law schools, and I teach the students, the law students and the business students that it's not simply knowing the rules and regulations. It doesn't matter how well you know the Bribery Act. It doesn't matter how well you know the FCPA. We're way beyond that, and you're gonna have to bring innovation to the business side.
And I'm really interested on that education piece and you speaking with students because I think other people on the podcast find that so rewarding, is the feedback that I've been having around keeping on the sharp end of compliance. And it makes a lot of sense, right? Because you're doing your podcast and you're also with the students. Broadening the sort of strengthening the role that compliance has, not just with companies, but with broader society. Do you think that's going to happen, or do you think that's sort of a pipe dream?
Not at all. So one of my favorite podcasts is called Adventures in Compliance, which is based upon the adventures of Sherlock Holmes. And it was just really an excuse to reread all of the novels, or all the short stories and all the novels. So I did all 56 short stories, and now I'm on the novels. And then we'll go to the movies, and, Benedict will be in there somewhere. There are compliance lessons in Sherlock Holmes, and one of the episodes, I can't even remember which story, I just said, "Wait a minute, this is pattern recognition. He's doing this in his head." Well, he was, and Conan Doyle was that brilliant to write a detective story, the father of detective stories that are engaging and are still read and loved today, but they're lessons in ethics, they're lessons in compliance, they're lessons in how to do investigations, there are lessons in even Sherlock Holmes occasionally has empathy, and when he doesn't, Dr. Watson has it for him. So, all of the things that you need to do as a compliance officer, and I explained that to a class one day, and we had one undergraduate in that class, and her eyes just lit up. She goes, "Pattern recognition, that's it. That's what I love." And so you can make that spark, but you can see that in things that you love reading or watching or doing, and that's the kind of storytelling that resonates with people that will motivate them to be the next generation of compliance professionals.
And if I was a compliance professional just starting out, would there be any advice that you could give me?
Take as many projects as you can, learn as wide a variety of things that you can, and, I'm a big believer in Malcolm Gladwell wrote, it's 10,000 hours of study, and he wrote it around the Beatles because he said the Beatles, um, 10,000 hours of study was in the cavern in Liverpool and in Hamburg, and that was how they learned to be the Beatles, and you can learn that in compliance as well.
I think you kind of followed that ethos, haven't you, from the beginning? But definitely. But I'm going to push you on this because you've done so much. You've done all the shows, you've done the books, you teach. If you had to be remembered for the one thing that you're most proud of, what would it be?
Well, it would be 2. I was a good father and I'm a good husband.
Nice. And finally, Tom, because our time together is sadly coming to an end, but I have one question I ask everyone who joins the podcast, and I'm particularly interested to hear your response. If you were putting together a leader's survival toolkit and you could only put 3 things in it, what would they be?
Listen, listen, listen.
And with that, Tom Fox, it's been an absolute pleasure. Great podcast. I can't wait to hear it back and get the response from our listeners. Thank you for joining us.
It's been my pleasure.
That's it for today's episode of Insights from the Coalface, Elevating Leadership Beyond the Boardroom. I hope this conversation left you with fresh insights, new perspectives, and a deeper connection to the challenges and opportunities of leadership. If you found value in today's discussion, I'd love for you to share it with your network, leave a review, or reach out to me with your thoughts. Leadership can be a lonely road, but it doesn't have to be. Let's keep learning, growing, and supporting each other. Until next time, stay resilient, stay authentic, and keep leading with purpose.